lifelong Catholic nurse with 39 years experience, love of my family life. She died 4 years ago in very traumatic circumstances. I was 23 years old, had no idea what was happening. She got terminal breast cancer and was told she had 2 months left to live. And upon hearing this and upon her pain and suffering becoming to the point where she could not take it anymore, she asked for assistance to die peacefully, which is, in the form of asking for medication from a doctor that will effectively cause your death, but not because you want to commit suicide, but because the pain is so bad that it is not tolerable for you anymore and you're going to die anyway. So Mum was a bit of a visionary, because voluntary assisted dying didn't exist in Australia at the time. It was being legislated in some states, but it wasn't legal anywhere in Australia in 2016. So obviously her request was refused, and she died in agony. And I had to watch her do that over a course of about 4 hours of her rasping. And, I'm sure many of you have seen the same things with parents and grandparents. I don't need to go through that, but it was really unpleasant. Hang on. Okay, so yeah, fast forward from 2016 to 2018-19, that's when the WA legislation was going to be introduced in Parliament. The campaign team in WA got me on board, and I said I was going to share my mum's story in order to try and help convince politicians that we really need this choice, because Mum was treated in one of the best palliative care facilities in Western Australia, and she still suffered a bucket load. So that was my role in the campaign, and that resulted in the law passing. I think it's easier to communicate through pictures rather than the words. So I'll just kind of show you a few things that I did. This was the walk from Melbourne to Perth. And I think Roger mentioned that voluntary assisted dying is also legal in Victoria. So it was a very deliberate decision to start in Melbourne and end in Perth. I was symbolically bringing the legislation that existed in Victoria over to Western Australia, my home. The walk took 70 days and I walked 1 marathon per day for 70 days. The entire trip is 3,500 kilometres, but I was walking a marathon a day, so that's 40 Ks a day. So that was it. This was me holding a white rose. So I walked across Australia holding a white rose because roses were my mum's favourite flower. It helped me to communicate, and I'll get to this in a minute. It helped me to communicate that I was just bringing a message and I didn't mean any harm. I didn't mean to insult or offend or upset anyone. I just had to share this message about someone that I really loved. Imagery is so important when campaigning, and I'll get to that in a minute. So let me get through the slides so that we can get onto your questions. I just put together a few photos that I'm really proud of, and I'm proud of them because I like to think that these photos show that I was very successful in the sense of it's not about getting politicians on side, just kind of like establishing from the very outset that you are not attacking them, that you are not their enemy, that you are standing side by side with the politicians working towards a common goal. So I'll just flick you through a few of these images. Let me know if anyone can't see them. This is me and the Premier of Victoria, Daniel Andrews, who actually kicked off my journey with me on the steps of Parliament House mid last year on the first day of my walk. That's she was the Attorney General of Victoria at the time, but the previous Health Minister, and then Jenny Mikakos, who is now the ex-Health Minister, and a bunch of media that came. I got to South Australia and spoke to Stephen Marshall in Adelaide at Parliament House. We had lunch, it was great. When I got back and arrived to Perth with 300 people flanking me, these were the politicians who were waiting for me outside WA Parliament House, including Malcolm McCusker, the Environment Minister, who I'm sure you guys are great friends with, members from Labor and Liberal, I think, Greens as well. That's Robin Chappell, who you guys would know. Lisa Harvey, who was the then leader of the opposition, really surprised everyone showed up and wanted to take a picture with me, which is really baffling for many people. But I think for me, it was just more of an indication of how effective my message and the campaign that we ran as a team, how effective our communication was in cooperating with, communicating with, and just kind of being nice to politicians, which is a bit of a weird concept for a lot of people, but it was very effective. So I'm very proud of that photo. This is me having a little cuddle with Mark McGowan when I got there because I was an emotional mess. Andrew Denton behind me, who was the reason that this walk even happened. Really great man and does really good work in the space. This is me with the Premier and the Health Minister. So the whole White Rose thing just started as an idea and kind of exploded. When I got to Parliament House, everybody was holding a white rose, and then we gave baskets of white roses to the politicians, which the media loved. Something that I learned from this campaign is that the media freak out when they see citizens and politicians actually getting along. I'll get to that in a minute as well, but I'm very proud of this photo as well. Don't worry about reading the whole text, but essentially this is Karen O'Donnell, a Liberal member of the lower house. So people knew during the campaign that it was mostly like Labor is pretty much all for voluntary assisted dying, whereas Liberals are kind of like not quite sure. So it was huge when he came out and stood up during his second reading speech and said, I used to be against voluntary assisted dying, and then I talked to Belinda, and then I changed my mind, and now I am voting for the voluntary assisted dying bill. That was a huge moment as well. And this is just another image to talk about how the media just suck it up. They love it when they see politicians and citizens interacting in a positive manner because it is so rare. So that's kind of my story. I think that's probably enough I'm sure you guys kind of get the idea of where I'm going. So what I was going to do next, also conscious of time, was to just kind of take you through three things. So number one, explaining the battlefield, I guess, the way that I analysed the political context before we went into the campaign, the things that I considered and how that helped along the way. The next thing I was going to talk about was like my secret ingredient to success when talking to politicians and creating political mobilisation and change. And the last thing would just be sort of like some other campaign details, like just some really basic things that I found we wouldn't have, they were really the building blocks of the campaign that I don't think we could have survived without. And I was just going to finish with that. Does that sound okay for everyone, or should I change tack or just take questions straight away?
Sounds great, Belinda. That sounds good.
Cool. All right. I am a chatterbox. Please stop me if I'm going off track. So keeping an eye on the
great.
Great. So the battlefield. So I feel the need to go through this because it really set in place how I came up with the campaign, the way that I communicated myself, the way that I communicated with politicians, and it was crucial to the success of the campaign. I stood back before I even started campaigning, before I even jumped in, and I saw the voluntary assisted dying campaign was a war of words. It was a war of words, facts, statistics, professionals, sort of basically just sort of yelling at each other through the media, on TV, in person. That kind of characterised the debate. I have to admit here and now that I'm very new to the climate change scene. I've had my head shoved so deeply into VAD for so long. I'm sure you guys know that you kind of get blinkers around every other issue, but I think that I have a general awareness that the climate change and the climate debate can get very tetchy. Everybody's a bit exhausted on both sides. Young people are exhausted. People who have been campaigning their whole lives are exhausted. What I saw with the voluntary assisted dying debate was that similar thing of everyone just sick of each other, and it was inherently negative. It was people complaining. It was people crying out for help and change, but not being listened to. People felt ignored on both sides. So that was the battlefield, and that was the point where I started. And I thought, okay, well, if we're going to get anywhere with this, we're going to have to address that. Another thing that I saw in the battlefield was the fact that it is so hard to stand out. It is so hard to get through to politicians because they have so much to do. Earlier this year, I worked as a staffer in a political office, and the sheer amount of emails and correspondence and phone calls they get about every issue under the sun is crazy. But I just knew that if I was going to do something, it couldn't be standard. It couldn't be pedestrian. It couldn't just be what you would normally do. It had to be something really big. And that was just fully acknowledging the fact that, we live in a social media time. We live in a globalized world. We live in a place of instantaneous communication where one news headline is a headline for about 3 hours and then it goes on to the next thing. So that was the battlefield. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're campaigning for causes that share similarities. So I'll take you to the next bit, if I can. There we go. So my secret to success, let me try and wrap this up for you, because I don't think I've ever quite crystallized this in my mind. So I'm going to do my very best. So there's this guy in the United States called Simon Sinek. I watched his TED talk and it changed my life. It changed the way that I campaign, and it probably is the reason why I was successful in what I did. He does this thing called the golden circle analysis, and his tagline is start with why. Okay, so we'll go to this one. So it sounds very like, you know, Silicon Valley, American or whatever, but bear with me. So basically in his TED talk, he talks about how, and I don't know how correct this is, but it worked for me and it worked for the campaign. So this is just what I know. He talks about in his TED talk about how when you make decisions, apparently, the part of your brain that makes decisions is more closely linked to emotion and feeling rather than logic and reason. So I don't know, I'm sure there are doctors here, and I know Jane, you know a doctor very well, so they're probably going to tell me I'm wrong, but from experience, I think this guy was onto something. By understanding that people make decisions based on their emotions and their feelings rather than logic and reason, I geared my campaign around emotion, feeling, and beliefs rather than facts, statistics, and numbers. That may sound insincere or it might sound sneaky, but as I'll talk about later, you need both. You need to have an emotional element, something about a vision, a belief. You need to inspire people and you need to back it up with your facts. But the way that I ran a campaign, or my walk, I led with the emotions and beliefs and had the facts in my backpack to substantiate anything I was trying to say. So, and by doing this, I found that it worked. So if I'm thinking, so I did a bit of reading about this carbon fee and dividend. Did I say that right? Carbon fee and dividend.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
So I'm going to try and link this in. I'm probably going to get this all wrong, but bear with me. So if we look at the what circle, right? So I imagine that everyone in the CCL wants action on climate change. We would like to divert the world from burning in flames and a lot of really bad stuff happening. So that's your what, right? If you go up to a politician and say, I want action on climate change, my guess would be that they will probably look at you blankly and kind of not do anything, right? If you then tell them how, okay, well, how are we going to stop climate change? And you start talking to them about the carbon fee and dividend. This is great. This is logical and this is reasonable and this makes so much sense. And I don't know why we're not doing it, but this is awesome. But if you follow what Simon Sinek and this golden circle analysis claims to be true, no matter how much you push the how, no matter how good your how is, you're still not going to get someone to make a decision about that unless you talk about why, unless you talk about beliefs, feeling, emotion. So I guess my question to you guys, and I was also asking myself just in terms of climate, like, why do we want action on climate change? Why do we so desperately need this carbon fee and dividend system in place? I don't have the answer because I'm so new to this. But I think that whatever that why is, it can't just be about, it can't just be about facts and figures and scientific hypotheses about what's going to happen. It has to be linked to some sort of vision about the future. It has to be linked to an emotional reason, a reason that is human, a reason that you can sit down and talk to a politician and they will feel moved emotionally. I know that sounds very esoteric and very, I don't know, girly, or whatever you want to call it, but I'm just sharing the experience that I had in the VAD debate, which did result in the passing of a law that has now changed the lives of every West Australian, which is awesome. I didn't talk about what, which was, voluntary assisted dying. I didn't talk about how, which was passing the legislation. I talked about why. I talked about beliefs that I had that everybody could share, which is that it is inhumane to allow a person to suffer when they're the medical means to help them and they don't want to suffer anymore. I talked about why, because I loved my mum. Everyone loves their mum. Areas of common ground that are not, I think emotional is the wrong word, but it goes to the core of who we are and is separate from logic and reason. Anyway, I could talk about that all day, but I will move on in the interest of time. And also your why, I found that the why had to be inherently positive. So the why, why? Because you love your mum, that's a positive feeling. Why? Because you don't want to see people suffer. It talks about negative stuff, but it's still inherently positive. So I see sometimes I stand back from the climate debate and I see a lot of whys being put out there by climate activists, climate lobbyists saying, okay, well, why do we need to do this? Because the world is going to go up in flames, because the world is in a lot of trouble. And all of these things, they are very scary in nature and very real. And I guess my question is, how can we repackage that and make the message inherently positive, a message about hope? Yes, all of those messages are in there somewhere every time we talk about climate. But I think if we can make those positive messages the forefront of the reasons why we do things, well, I say we as if I'm a climate activist, but the reason why someone like the CCL would do things, I think that could potentially be very helpful. Also, just a little side note, in prepping for this afternoon, I was chatting to a friend who's on the inside, so he works for the government. And he was talking about how, oh, well, Belinda, you shared your story and you were so effective in VAD. And this is, my friend is a staffer for the federal government. He's an okay guy. So he's a staffer for the federal government. And he actually threw an idea out there, which was, you can't really say, oh, Belinda's mum would suffer if there was no climate change agreement or something like that. But one example of a person or a human story that you could bring into the climate debate that talks about a human thing and it's a reason why and it's positive is talk about, I don't know, farmers that are going to be affected by climate change or something like that. But anyway, I thought I'd just throw that in there because, that was just some insider information that I got this afternoon. So I'll just go to the last one and then I'll take some questions. I hope this is all making sense. So after throwing all of that really inspirational, wishy-washy, ideas about, positivity and the reasons why, I understand that is not enough to carry a campaign. You need to have your nuts and bolts and really strong foundations if you're campaigning for legislative change. So I've just threw out there a few things that really came to mind, and we can talk about more in a minute when I take questions. What you are doing right now in terms of, I know that, I'm very aware that Jane writes letters to the editor like a boss. She is amazing. You are all amazing. I've seen so many of the letters to the editor that go out from people who are so concerned about the climate. We absolutely need to continue that. I'm not suggesting that we should all create this crazy emotional campaign and that is enough to create legislative change. It is so important to have a baseline. So keep up the amazing work you're doing. Another thing, momentum. So the reason why the VAD campaign was so effective in such a short amount of time was because we had the baseline to start with, and then we dropped a bomb essentially, and sort of had this really urgent deadline of the bill passing. But basically we had something to sort of run up to. Campaigner and activist and advocate fatigue is so real. I think that's something that you guys all know so well and live with every day. What I found and what we found as a campaign team really effective was having that, not like an endpoint, but something to work towards. Otherwise you just burn out and your creativity wanes and your inspiration and motivation wanes. Having something to build momentum towards was really helpful. I don't know enough about the climate debate to know what that high point could be, but that could potentially be something really helpful to you guys that really was make or break for our campaign. If we had to campaign at the same intensity for 10 years, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere. We had to shorten that duration to a year run up, and we fired everything within that year, and then we were done. So that was something that I can just share from my own experience. This one's quite technical, so it's the third point there, faces not words. I did have a really quick look at your social media page, and I'm not sure who runs it. They're doing a great job. One thing that we found really effective was that on social media specifically, people will click on faces and not words, especially on Facebook. So I thought I'd just throw that out there in case that helps whoever's doing your social media. If you want to check out my Facebook page, you just Google or go on Facebook and find Belinda's Brave Walk, and you'll see that it's mostly faces and humans, and that was an absolute asset to the campaign. The social media was incredibly effective. We could not have done the campaign without it, and we found that posting pictures of people's faces, people are much more likely to click on that. So that's just a little snippet of technical help or a technical tip. Last two bits, simplify. So I spoke to some politicians who you would think would know what is euthanasia, what is voluntary assisted dying. What is a hospice? What is palliative care? A lot of them did not know. So I found that in order to have an effective conversation with politicians, I had to simplify everything, not in a way that makes them feel stupid, but creates a safe space for them to actually say, I don't know what a carbon fee and dividend is. I don't really know what carbon whatever is. And in just clearing up those first few minutes, it will really help them to open up and allow you to have a more effective conversation. And then the last point that I've written there, the facts to substantiate your why, your emotional why or your reason why, that is absolutely essential. So I'm not for a minute discounting the importance of facts, statistics, research, the millions of scientists around the world who know what's happening. We absolutely need that. And I think just from what I learned in the campaign, we are always going to need that. But I feel that what really got us over the line with voluntary assisted dying was focusing on human reasons why we need legislative change. The end.
Fantastic, Belinda. Thank you. Thank you so much. And if you could stop screen share, then we can see everybody all at once.
Yes.
And
okay, hold on, let me.
who wants to ask questions? Well, I'm going to.
Should I stop screen sharing? Hold on, sorry. Stop share. If I do that.
That's it.
Okay, cool.
Now you can see us all, and I'm going to privilege myself with the first question, and that is to say, you mentioned that you would talk about imagery, and I think you partially answered that question. You said you'd talk more about it, and I think you did, but I think it'd be useful for me to hear more specifics about the power of imagery in this process.
The power of imagery. So do you mean about the faces, not words thing, or do you mean more about the white rose thing?
Well, both, I guess, but how consciously you used imagery in your design and the process, I guess.
Sure. Imagery was absolutely crucial to the success of my own campaign. So the white rose, as I said before, symbols can. See, this is the thing, like politicians just read words all day and speak words all day. And the fastest way to get straight to the core of their, get them in the fields, as we would say, is to use images. And so the white rose, like, I don't know, it just makes people melt, apparently. I wasn't expecting it to be so effective, but that's what it does. It reminds people of mothers. It reminds people of funerals. It reminds people of love and vulnerability and all these kinds of things. It was absolutely crucial. I think just reiterating what I said about like, the VAD debate was so wordy, so fact-driven and so statistical and scientific and medical and lots and lots of words, really big, long words. And so when you cut white rose at someone's feet, it has a huge impact. Them are really important. The fact that it was consistent throughout the campaign and so versatile was really amazing. And then what else was there? Was what was the other symbol I talked about? Oh yeah, so faces and not words. So, I mean, the importance of imagery. So the faces is not so much about imagery, but it's just, I think I'm just coming back to that point about how in today's world, there are so many words. Like, I think one thing I find really daunting about the climate debate is that there is so much to read. I could spend the rest of my life reading the research that exists, and still never get there. But I think when we are talking about something that is so complex and so wordy, yes, we need to have those things in our backpack to pull out when we can. But if we lead with images and come back to things like faces instead of words, I think that's so much more effective. And the faces instead of words thing, I think that's been researched as well. So social media is such an effective tool. And I think we are really going to need it in the climate space. But I think they ran like research, studies and everything. And it's just, if you want to have lots of people reacting to your Facebook things and actually taking notice, it is absolutely essential to put people's faces in there. It's just, I don't know, I guess it's a human thing. We search for things that we recognize, and we respond to faces so much more than words.
Thanks. I think you're reading the question that's just come up. When using faces, how do you think this relates to polarization?
When using faces, how do you think this relates to polarization? Presumably there's a fair bit of additional thinking that needs to go into who features in this imagery convincing to those on the other side. Yes, so this is where you get a social media consultant or you get like a social media expert or something in. So I was, wait, that's from Ryan. Thank you, Ryan. Oh, thank you. You said it was a great talk. Okay, cool, glad. So I was very lucky in a sense that my background is in social media consulting and social media freelance. So like before I started all of this, I was traveling around the world with my partner trying to forget about my mother's traumatic death. It didn't work. But anyway, my job was that people, I don't know, like a restaurant or a beautician who does nails or whatever, they would send me all this stuff and I'd do stuff on social media. So I was very lucky that I already had that in my toolkit. So the question, you know, when using faces, how do you think this relates to polarization? So the question is kind of like who should feature in the imagery to be convincing to those on the other side? It is so hard to find the exact right person to feature. I think it kind of takes someone who knows social media. And if you don't have someone who knows social media, everybody learned. Like I learned social media over the course of I don't know how many years. Experiment with what works. So let's say that you've got, I don't know, like a Zoom, like a educational citizens forum coming up and you want like lots of people to show up. For the first, like on Monday, post a picture of, I don't know, a person in a doctor's suit, like a middle-aged white man in a doctor's suit. See how many people respond. On the Wednesday, repost it and put a picture of Greta Thunberg, right? The 16-year-old Swedish girl, I think I've said her name wrong, and see how many people respond to that. So you learn by trial and error what imagery works. And I definitely learned that with the campaign as well. I learned as I went along what worked and what didn't. And that's kind of why social media is really exhausting, and like monitoring what's working and not is really exhausting. You can delegate it to a volunteer or whatever, but I think considering I'm going to use the word lethal weapon, or, you know, what a powerful tool social media is, it is well worth investing in a person to just kind of like handle that. And this is not like a plug for my services or anything. I'm not working in that space anymore, but I think that's just something that I learned from the campaign. I don't know if that answered your question, Ryan, sorry.
I think it was perfect.
Great.
Jane.
Oh, first of all, Belinda, I'm so pleased you came and I really enjoyed that talk. It's so full of wisdom. But one of my questions is, what did you do with the really difficult politicians who were never going to come over because of their core belief, religious beliefs or something like that? I believe there were still a couple that absolutely wouldn't budge. Or were there any really, really bad cases that did come over, and what brought them over?
Okay, two things I'll say here. Thanks for the question. So two things I'll say here. I got a really good piece of advice from a political strategist who's been in the business for like 20, 30 years, worked for the ex-premier, everything. He told me that you're going to have a spectrum of politicians in front of you that you want to get on side. There's going to be the 5%, 10%, whatever it is, on the extreme end of the spectrum that are total climate haters. They don't believe that climate change exists, blah, blah, blah. Leave it. Drop it. Leave them be. Don't waste a single minute of your time on them, right? So you want to, and then the ones who are on your side, you want to give them some love. You want to like appreciate them and like keep them close and, you know, all of that terrible terminology. But it's true. Like you want to make them know that they're appreciated and keep them with you because they're such an asset to you. You want to hit everything in the middle. So anyone who's a soft yes, who's a soft, you know, support, you want to push them over to the yes, which shouldn't take too much convincing. Then you've got the people that are really on the fence and you want to like, you know, go hard at them. And then you've got the people who are kind of on the fence, but more towards the no. You want to sort of target them, but not worry too much because it might be a waste of your energy. So you go really hard at the people in the middle, but also, just then you were saying, you know, was there anyone who really moved? There absolutely were. So politicians are really funny because there are some that will claim that they, for example, I don't know, they don't believe in climate change or that they are not prepared to take any measures in order to, you know, take action on climate change. Sometimes they're hiding how they really feel because of party dynamics. You know, they're a member of X party and like the leader of that party is like a total climate denier. And so they kind of say, oh, no, I don't believe in climate change just to keep the boss happy. But when you get them in a room by themselves, they're totally on your side. And they're not just doing it because you're there. Like they really, really do. They really are on your side. And so if you see in the papers, for example, like what we saw a lot in the campaign was, this politician is absolutely against voluntary assisted dying, or this politician is on the fence about voluntary assisted dying. Then you sit in a room with them and they're like, no, I'm totally for it. I just can't do it because of this reason. So I would say don't ever think that anyone's a lost cause unless they really are a lost cause, in which case leave them alone and go and have a cup of tea.
That's great.
Right. Thank you, Belinda. We've got time for one more question. Well, I'll just ask one then. It sounds like the campaign was really well organised, and you must have had some really good people and think tanking together and putting together the resources and the tactics and so on. And I'm just interested to know how you put that together.
There was an entire army of people working behind the scenes to support me. I feel guilty when people say, oh, Belinda, you did a great job, because there were like 100 people helping me, right. And like a lot of money as well. Like I got financial backing from CCL Australia, which was created by Andrew Denton, and he funded my entire walk. So it was like an operation, like a military operation. That is another thing, I guess. I mean, I was going to say it when I said, the campaign essentials, but every cause could do with an extra few $1 million in order to campaign better. Every campaign could do with, an army of 4 publicists. Like I had 4 publicists working for me, or whatever, like hired by Andrew. And then we had you need to have, I think one thing I will say is we absolutely needed the political know-how of a few like political consultants that were hired for this particular campaign, who really just took my idea and pointed it in the right direction. So yeah, there was publicists, political directors, photographers, people that helped with social media, the whole works. That being said, the only reason that the campaign was effective was because we had that to support the campaign, which is effective in its messaging, which was the why. So that's why I started in the second slide with, make sure that you have your why right, make sure you have your reason, because unless you get your reason right, unless you hit that emotional sweet spot, you can have as much publicity as you want, you can have as many consultants and professionals as you want. It's not going to get off the ground unless you get like the very fundamentals right. But yes, I hope that answers your question, that we had like an army of people working. We're very lucky. And that's, I guess, goes back to the other point that I made about when you have a short run up, it's a lot more achievable, because if we had tried to impose people for like 40 years, we would have run out of money. So that's, I guess, another nugget of knowledge that I gained during the campaign.
That's very useful. Thanks very much, Belinda. And thanks for joining us and sharing all of that wisdom with us. I think it's quite inspiring, well, very inspiring, and given me some food for thought, and I'm sure all of us as well. And particularly as we're about to move into another phase of our development, and it's good to have that sort of inspiring information behind us. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I know I did warn you that I'm a chatterbox, so I'm sorry if that was a bit overwhelming, but I hope that you guys took away something from it, and thank you again for having me.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our CCL channel by hitting the button in the top left-hand corner of this screen. Spread the word of CCL by using the share icon to as many of your contacts as possible. Thank you. See you next video.